idyllic Auroville, a truly global village with people from 58 nations, 50 years of peaceful coexistence and sustainable living. When its time-tested founding principle was put to test in the pandemic, the community, inspired by the teachings of philosopher and yogi Sri Aurobindo, was quick to close ranks, implementing a strict lockdown and COVID protocol even before government orders.
Currently, the population of Auroville is around 3,300. Of course, I mean, nobody is completely safe in that sense, and we haven't avoided the situation. The main things that have helped to keep the cases a bit lower are that, for one thing, we've restricted visitors, and there is a very systematic and thorough system of contact tracing and follow-up to try to break the chain of infection and transmission. In the first wave, we only had about 20 cases in all those months, and this time since March, we've had about 90 cases.
The Auroville community ensures its daily needs are within reach. With 2 in-house health centers, food at their doorsteps, and volunteers who are just a call away.
The Auroville has a clinic and ambulance service, and together they had a task force for COVID. And for people who are tested positive, they would follow up. So they would come and bring you some equipment to measure blood pressure and oxygen levels, temperature, and a chart. And they ask you to measure twice a day, fill it in. And in the evening, someone would get in touch by WhatsApp, and you could share your details and ask any questions and they would monitor how you're feeling and if you felt you needed some further help or not.
Aurovilians credit their active lifestyle for staying fighting fit. Most either walk, run or cycle to get around. The pandemic only furthering their enthusiasm.
Auroville, we're a very sporting community. We've gone through schooling with sport, horseback riding, sports, basketball and all that. So it's not something new to us, but it's enhanced a little bit more because of COVID. Right. In a business perspective, it's done good. But of course, we don't have stock of bikes, but people want to ride. People want to get out there. People want to get healthy.
Despite its remoteness, access to locally produced and freshly grown organic food has helped boost immunity.
In Auroville, we've been very lucky by having a lot of ingredients which are grown locally and or from this area and or sourced kind of more ethically in the sense of less preservatives, less chemicals if we can, and just cooking with those raw ingredients which are relatively, let's say, more healthy than hyper-industrialized food has helped us sort of, I think, keep our immune system in check and on par, and that's been good for us.
Income-wise, the community is seemingly self-sustained. All money earned by Aurovilians goes back to the foundation for community development.
So people come here from the Auroville community and get a takeaway lunch. Like that, we are able to keep our people working during this pandemic. The income-wise, it's of course a lot less.
The Auroville community has generated quite a lot of curiosity with steady inflow of tourists coming in to take a good look at their way of life and, of course, this stunning location. Initially, district administration assumed that because of the steady inflow of tourists, Auroville would be a super spreader or an epicenter of COVID-19. But hats off to the Auroville Foundation, they've indeed proved them wrong. They've done all those protocols right, leading by example. With camera person Pawan Kumar, Nabila Jamal for India Today.
Okay, welcome all. That was a special report featuring Chali and other Aurovilians, always with a little bit of hyperbole and cliche, but still, showing Auroville's efforts and giving us a little bit of the ground reality. And I think it's so wonderful that we can have you both to give us a little check-in. So
good evening. Hello to everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's another beautiful day. The weather is cool because it has rained. As we know, the weather patterns are changing all over. But in our area, it just led to cooler, greener summers. So on that note, I'll let Chali take it away. And maybe people have specific questions. Before Chali begins, I'd just like to say, because I've been aware of what the working committee, together with a group of volunteers that joined in, formed the COVID task force. And so it's been, now the pandemic has lasted over a year, and they've been really busy networking with the authorities in India, you know, to get testing, to see how to manage the pandemic. I was involved for a short while with food delivery for people that had to be quarantined, etc., etc. And it's been really an amazing effort, you know, where the community has had to come together and put in time and draw on volunteers from all ages and all groups. And the cleaning, you know, in the beginning we were cleaning surfaces. All of the outlet shops had to be cleaned. A lot of the youth joined in for that. It was a real mix. There were older people and youth, actually. It was pretty amazing. And I think organizing it from Chali's perspective must have been very difficult. And, you know, it's been, I work at the land board, and somehow we just felt really supported by all of you, and also within, even though, you know, it's been trials and everybody's been trying to figure out this thing. It's been actually quite a beautiful experience. Chali, what would you say?
Yeah, I think, I mean, one of the thoughts that has come up quite often is that these kinds of situations bring out the best and the worst in in humanity, in individually and collectively. But fortunately, I think I can safely say that here it's mostly been the best. It's to see the way that people have come together to support the patients with you know, those of us who were trying to organize what needed to be organized, and people, the way people responded and came together, and the patience that was shown when trying to deal with a situation that nobody had ever really dealt with or faced before has been quite gratifying and hopeful. I'm curious if you all have any specific questions, because I'm not really sure what you would like to hear about. The little clip, the news clip, did mention that a few things. For example, the fact that at the very beginning of the pandemic, the local authorities here, the medical health authorities and police and administrative authorities, they all were convinced that Auroville would be the place where there would be an explosion of cases, that would be the hub of the infection in this area. Mainly, sorry?
Like a super spreader.
Yeah, I mean, the starting point for something like that, mainly because Auroville has so many visitors every day. I mean, I don't know, I don't know if you're aware of the averages, but in normal times, the average over the year is about 5,000 to 6,000 visitors a day, with a peak of about 10,000 to 15,000 a day in certain times of the year. So with that kind of footfall, there was a lot of attention on Auroville in the beginning, because there was the thought that we would be the starting point of a super spreading event, and ultimately, that didn't happen. And I think it was partly because we closed Matra Mandir and Visitor Center very early. That was the first thing that we did, even before the government started issuing guidelines. So that already really minimized the footfall and stopped the major flow of people coming from outside of the area. And then slowly over the months, we had to develop our systems and see how to respond to the lockdown and all of the unknown factors and uncertainties. And ultimately, the officials realized that we were responding well and responsibly and quite effectively. But I have to say that part of the reason why we were able to do that was because we had actually really good support from and collaboration from those local authorities. Our local health authorities, the local police, and mainly these two bodies were extremely helpful and supportive and understanding and patient, and so that was a huge help, at least for the working committee and the task force, the COVID task force, who had to interact with them and depend on them for quite a lot of different aspects of the response. And now another thing that was mentioned in the clip is that people ask, you know, have we seen a difference between that initial period of the pandemic and what's happening now? And there, in my observation, and I've been involved since the beginning, in my observation, and I think that this kind of reflects what people are seeing with these different variants around the world. In the first wave, let's say, but covering a period of, I don't know, eight months or something, Auroville only had about 20 cases, people who tested positive in all those months. And most of those people were asymptomatic. So hardly any of them were getting sick or even showing symptoms of any kind. They were testing positive from contact with somebody and in this wave, since March, we've had over 90 cases. I think now it must be about 95 or so. And we did a count at one point, and it was consistently. I mean, now we're down to, I think only one person is actually actively positive right now. But at one time we had up to 35 people a day, every day, who were positive. And I think the count was about 2/3 of the number who were positive were actually sick. So this was a big change from what we had experienced before. And this also put much more strain on our medical facilities and personnel. I mean, we have doctors and we have a very good ambulance team and ambulance service, but there are very few people. I mean, the ambulance team, there's one senior paramedic, one administrator, and then there's a small team of first responders. But it's, you know, when you have 35 people a day who are sick and you have to monitor their vitals, and you have to, if a few of them actually needed more serious support and care, and a few had to be hospitalized, then that really put a strain on and showed an area of Auroville's infrastructure and support structure that needs more attention and needs to be developed. But we managed just at one point. There was a bit of a concern that everybody was going to just burn out and collapse, but then things eased. So now we're doing okay.
Somebody asked about vaccinations, and so like I think all alternative communities, there's of course a split view on those things that have been either debated or whatever. And finally, you know, people are getting vaccinated, some are, and some are refusing. And so just like in the rest of the world, you don't have a unified response to that. Sorry, I just saw that one of the messages that came in.
Yeah, so I see that in the chat. So, I mean, as far as from the working committee's perspective, meaning, you know, a more, I don't know, official perspective, this discussion or the topic of vaccinations comes up in various ways. And, you know, some people, we get requests from some people to organize vaccination camps in Auroville. And there are other people who are very strongly saying, no, we don't want it in Auroville. People should have the choice and should be able to get it if they want, but don't bring it in. So basically what we've been doing is that we regularly put out a bulletin to the community, giving information about where people can get vaccinations if they want them. And we also remind everybody that you know, this is a personal choice, and that we hope that people will do their research and make an informed decision. So there are camps that are organized by the local health authorities in the surrounding villages. And there was one in Kulapalayam the other day. There have been a couple on Kut Road and different, very close by. So then we just inform the community that on these days, at these times, there'll be vaccination camps, and there are places in Pondi that people can go to also. And so we share that information and then let people make their choice.
Auroville Village Action is also clubbed together with the block medical department and has helped to organize in the local villages, Kulapalayam, Edanchavadi, and Bomapalayam vaccination camps. And those of us who, you know, have a lot of employees or workers share that information. There seems to be quite a bit of skepticism about the vaccine, even in the local population. So I think, you know, the news cycle has affected people's mind. But now in the second wave, and after seeing this huge amount of deaths in India, I think more people have been prompted to take the vaccine. But yeah, so
there have also been some issues on and off with supply. I know that there have been a couple of times when the vaccination centers haven't been able to vaccinate the number of people who have gone to get it because they just don't have the supply. But it seems that it's easing up again now and seems to be flowing a little bit more smoothly again. I think Roger had a question.
Yeah, I was very happy to see, I think it was in the news and notes, that a new secretary has been appointed to head the foundation, and she sounds extraordinarily good. I hope she is. But I'd be very interested to hear from the two of you a little bit of, if you know anything of the process of selecting this person. Of course, we read things about the government and all of that, and yet it's the government that's selecting the person. And I thought it sounded on the surface like a very good selection. And also, do you know if there is going to be any reinstatement of the International Advisory Council? which has been sorely missed the last 4 or 5 years. So that's all.
Well, International Advisory Council, the working committee asks and reminds and prods and pokes and tries to bring it back onto the table again and again. But unfortunately, there has been not even any rumors about the IAC for a long time. About a year ago or more, about a year and a half ago maybe, there was some talk, and a couple of people were even approached by governing board members at that time to see if they might be willing to be part of it if it was formed or when it was formed. But then everything went quiet again, and we haven't heard anything since then. As far as the secretary, I mean, the process technically is that the ministry puts out an announcement for the post, a public announcement. And then people send in their applications, and there are certain criteria that you have to meet in order to apply. So that's what happened in this case as well. But for it went through, as far as we've heard, it went through several rounds, and they had to put out the notice several times, either because they didn't get the responses that they were looking for, or because I know in a couple of cases they had actually decided to reach out to a couple of candidates, and then those people had retracted or withdrawn their application for various reasons. I mean, it's been about 2 years now that we haven't had a secretary. This person seems to be, I mean, it's interesting because it's the first woman secretary we'll have had. So, and she's, from what I've heard from different people who know her, because she is known in Auroville, she's been here a few times. She was very close to Kirit Joshi. She is originally, her family is originally from the Chennai area. But she's been posted in Gujarat for many, many years. We're never able to say for sure what's going on behind the scenes to bring someone like her here. So I can't really comment on the process as far as, you know, who made the final selection and why her. But from what I've heard, she's strong, experienced. She's an active IAS officer, which isn't always the case. Often it's retired administrative service officers. So, and she, I mean, as I said, she knows Auroville. She has been in touch with Mother and Sri Aurobindo's philosophies and teachings for a very long time. So I think that will definitely mean that there's a lot of goodwill there. Vern, did I answer your question to some extent, Roger?
Yeah, it's, I think the fact that she worked as an assistant to Kirit Joshi is very strong. That's why I was happy. That was the main reason. Yeah, so when does she arrive, or has she arrived?
No, she's due to arrive on Sunday, and then our first meeting with her will be at the Matrimandir, and then we'll see how things go from there. But we expect her to hit the ground running and be ready to dive headfirst into work. That's the message we got.
Renu, any thoughts?
Renu, any thoughts?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having a female secretary. And I'm looking forward to, especially with the land matters, I'm looking forward to being able to have a secretary that will act, because it's a little bit tricky right now. We have a very well-organized, well-oiled machine by a number of speculators that are just raising the prices everywhere and buying certain plots, which then, or at least putting down the money and fencing it up. And so that kind of freaks us out. And in that manner, together with a few elements in the village, they're really able to raise the prices to, it's just phenomenal. It's not even, it doesn't make any sense. So I'm looking forward to some sort of protected status for Auroville. And maybe, a woman is usually a little more efficient. I mean, though I have to say the previous secretary, I wasn't in the land board yet when he was working, but he was actually very knowledgeable and was quite helpful. And my co-members say that, it was really, they learned a lot from him.
Mr. Chonkat.
Nonsense attitude. The problem with the secretaries is always to protect them a little bit, because there's, there's 3,000 people in Auroville and there's 3,000 versions of Auroville. And the secretary can get very quickly overcrowded and pulled in all directions. So, it's a tricky position, and hopefully everybody can rally to see the point of protection, because it's quite obvious what's happening on the ground. But that's not a very cheery note. And Julian warned us that we had to be cheery. So the other things I do want to say is, during this whole lockdown, as obviously where there's no tourist industry and everything, there's been an incredible sense of calm, despite all of this work that Chali described. And it's true, it's been incredible. It's been like the 1970s, and for so many people in Auroville, they never experienced that. No tourism. And for me, it's sort of like the smell or flavor of early days of, Auroville being lived by the people who live here, not just, the whole catering to this enormous tourist industry, which economically we've kind of been obliged to. That's just sort of that vacuum. Has been interesting, because it has had effects on how we function, how we have to share our resources, how we have to work better on the economy, things that everybody always said, oh, these things need to be looked at, but suddenly they really need to be looked at, because they need, things need to function. And so, the BCC has been doing a fairly good job, I think. There's a new team in there, and all of you guys have been helping and supporting. It's been amazing, because I know from my little perspective in the forest here, we've still been able to pay the worker, even all those months that people didn't come. They were supported by Auroville. And I think, it's been, first of all, it's been a blessing to be in Auroville during this whole pandemic. The rest of India stuck in an apartment, this being in a city, I just cannot imagine. We always had our greenery, we had the space, and it was just wonderful. So yeah, the tourist part was one thing, and then also no workers. So it's like then suddenly you emerge into another kind of paradigm, which I felt had been missing. So I personally, I thought, wow, this is a good opportunity to make some big changes, and they're slowly being made. So let's see.
Vern, did you have a question?
I did. I posted it. I just wanted to know which vaccine was being used.
It's a version of the AstraZeneca, and then there's also the Covishield, which is the Indian-made one, which is still seeking WHO approval to be recognized. I think it's just been recognized in Spain and Germany.
Yeah, here the two are the Covaxin, and Covishield. Covishield is AstraZeneca, but they're both manufactured in India, so there's still some question about, is it recognized, is it approved? In the EU doesn't have either of the Indian vaccines on their list of approved vaccines, but it seems it's coming. So like a lot of other things, it's in flux. There are two questions I see on the chat. Madhavi had asked, how are you preparing for the third wave, which may come later on?
A lot of people have had COVID, so there's a growing immunity. Then a lot of the older people have gotten vaccines, so there's that. By now, we've also learned and have disciplined ourselves to isolate, and this whole 2-week isolation and all, people have been adhering to it, So I think, I expect it'll be tough in India, because still the amount of people have not, the population is huge, but I think in Auroville itself, a lot of people have had, especially the youth, have already had COVID. So, because just like Chali said, the second wave suddenly was a lot of people that got it. But it was I have to say, it was pretty mild. My daughter had it. Just after 5 days, she got better. Bill, like everybody, like everywhere in the world, people are having ivermectin cures, vitamin D cures. Personally, I've been taking vitamin D. Everybody has, the world is quite confused right now because there's a lot of information. So everybody's picking whatever suits them and then publicizing it. So yeah, there's all of that. But yeah, we'll just have to see when the tourists open up. I don't know how, because when the tourists open up, it means also a lot of employees. And then people are going to have to see whether they're going to take employees that are at risk, or whether they're going to ask the employees to get vaccinated. So, I expect those will be the next questions, because or I see slowly the mood in the village changing as there's less fear of the vaccines, more people getting vaccinated, and nothing happens. So they're like, oh, okay. So yeah, it will be an issue. Let's see. Anything to say about that, Chali? Did I kind of answer that?
Yeah, I think that covers most of it. One thing also is that hopefully, because I think one of the reasons why this last wave came on so suddenly and took us by surprise to some extent was because India in general, which has been reported in the news quite extensively, and Auroville as well, had become quite complacent somehow, and kind of felt like we could all go back to normal, no masks and gatherings and meetings and everything else. And so hopefully this time around we'll be a little bit wiser about still continuing to take precautions and not, from one day to the next just going back to business as usual. Let's see.
But then you have to also balance that with people just being tired of the whole thing.
Yeah. But that's
that too,
that's been for a long time, as it is everywhere in the world. And I think, it's definitely true. We're all pretty tired of it. But I think that this last wave has also shown, because it was more intense and more people were sick to varying degrees, that's also helped people to realize that we do have to be aware and conscious and careful. And so let's see, it's always, the whole thing is a balancing act on many levels. There was one question about, is the pandemic, since we're talking about that, is the pandemic in decline now in South India? And Roger wants to know if any of you will be able to visit. That is, the pandemic is in decline in South India. It's still not, I mean, the Tamil Nadu government is still, and somebody had asked about lockdown. We are still under lockdown to a certain extent in Tamil Nadu and in Pondicherry. Pondicherry is a little bit more open in some ways than Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu still, for example, doesn't allow seating in restaurants at all. You can only get takeaway or delivery from restaurants, whereas in Pondicherry you can actually go into a restaurant and sit and eat with a 50% capacity of the venue. So we are under certain, there's limited transport, public transport, you know, things like that. But otherwise, it's pretty open again. And every week, it's going week by week. So every week we get a new set of guidelines from the government, and there's each week a little easing of the restrictions. Coming here, visiting in January, February, it's really hard to say. I mean, we've been saying for months that, oh yeah, in a couple of months it should be okay, in a couple of months it should be okay. But India is still not issuing tourist visas at all. So, and so far there's no sign that they're going to start anytime soon. So yeah, I don't know. Day by day.
Has this, I have another question, sorry. Has this, what you described as a fairly peaceful refuge period this last year, with shades of the early days, has that done anything to open the stalemate that has been going on with the development office with Navneer? Or is that still kind of a blockage?
Oh, you've touched on a how to put it, a touchy topic. No, I don't think that the situation has helped to ease the differences of opinion, the conflicts, the challenges as far as development and TDC, unfortunately.
Is that a reflection of the generations at all, or does that have nothing to do with it?
I don't think it's really generations. I think it's more a question of ideologies and interpretations and
inflexibilities.
Yeah, I mean, you know, having in certain cases, taking extreme points of view and holding to them. This is right now, it's one of the biggest challenges, I think. I mean, land is I would say the biggest challenge, but this whole question of development and how, and the balance between consultation and involvement of, you know, the residents at large, and TDC, the group mandated to take these things forward, is one of the big topics that needs to be tackled.
It is also, I think it is, I mean, it is a little bit generational also, definitely. There is a majority of older people that are more attached to the master plan perspective 2025, and then the younger people who are like, hey, you know, where climate change and healing the earth is definitely more up on their agenda. I think there is a little bit of a generational divide there, but yeah. And you know, the center of this whole thing is, for example, the youth center, where there's a forest, and for example, the controversy that's happening right now is whether the Crown Road has to be perfectly round, and if it does, it sort of cuts straight through the youth center and a large swath of forest. So it's also about adapting to what maybe exists, maybe what should be cherished. So is the forest an important thing? You know, some people feel very emotional about it with climate change, and you know, oh, it's a mantric thing, it has to be perfectly round, and the deviation of a couple of 100 meters is unacceptable to some, and so, you know, it stands, and it's been difficult.
Another big question that's going to have to be tackled there is how to address so-called violations of the master plan, and how things are supposed to be developed in the future. So I mean, and this is one of the things that, you know, there are instances where now in this more modern time, with Auroville developed at a higher level, on a material level than it was before, there's more attention into trying to carry out the development in, you know, according to the master plan. But in the past, there wasn't that as much clarity on what that development could or should look like. So there are things, development, as we all know, took place quite organically in many cases. And now certain people look back on some of these developments and say, oh, but that's a violation of the master plan. And so this is also something that is going to have to be put on the table and talked about openly, and with some flexibility. But it's a complicated topic.
Mahalingam.
As they all are.
Yeah, Mahalingam turned 101 yesterday, and I went there with a couple of gifts from the working committee, and there was a little tea party. Quite amazing, quite amazing. He was sitting up in a chair, and he can he knows people. He doesn't hear well, but he knows people. He can speak. He can read and interact. So yeah, it was very sweet. I'm just looking at the chat. There are a couple of questions Rohini had asked. Interesting what Renu said about Auroville feeling like the old days. What kinds of changes could you make regarding tourists, etc., post-pandemic? Yeah, I mean, this is what Renu described as something that I've heard from a lot of people. That there was a feeling of kind of phew, that there wasn't the crowd, there weren't the crowds, the frenzy, the you know, kind of a vibration that had changed and come down a bit from what normally exists. It's hard to say what changes can be made in the long term, because as Renu also mentioned, it's somehow, for better or for worse, there is a certain financial dependency on tourism. So it's going to be a bit, I think it is something we have to look at, how we handle the growing number of tourists who come through. But I don't think that we'll be able to stop it completely. And in a way, we shouldn't also, because this is one way that people can come into contact with Auroville, can be touched in some way. So, you know, you never know what that contact point will be. One thing that has been put in place because of the pandemic and the restrictions is that even when the visitor center reopened, they were only taking a certain number of people per day. So they had really restricted the number, and they announced that on the website, saying that they will only take this number per day. Please book. And then, so they would take a certain number of bookings a day, and then have a certain number who could just kind of show up, but not the way that it was before, which was, you know, just a flood of people coming whenever they wanted and wandering around. And so I think things like that will continue.
I think also this is where you know, having a planning team that is has some common sense and is respected in the community would make a difference, because right now there's not a lot of homogeneity in Auroville. You have, just like in the world, a kind of explosion of different ideas, and it's all very strident and vehement. So it's a little bit silly because one sort of misses the forest for the trees. But for example, you know, the whole idea of the visitor center, which was an area, is like, okay, this is where you guide the tourism, so it's not everywhere. People seem to have forgotten that, and so you'll be shocked when you come back. The road from Kulapalayam near Arbery Corner is now just being shop. So the whole feeling of Auroville is, you know, and other people are like, oh, you know, what they're developing, I also want to develop on Auroville land. And I'm like, you know, I'm like, no, it's not at all what we wanted to do. In fact, at this point, you know, I would say it would be smarter to expand the visitor center area, do something to allow this kind of commercial traffic and develop the international zone at this early stage, make things happen, you know. But everything's a little bit like both stuck in ideology, not able to deal with the practicalities, carry on as usual. the fact of the matter is, it's also very few people. There's a aging population in Auroville that is also just has put in their fair share and they're done. Then there's the searching population that's just going to try out different things. And then I don't know, you have about and the 100, 200 people that are just with their carrying the weight of this enormous thing. So there's a high burnout rate, a lot of controversy, a little bit difficult. It's a bit difficult right now. It's a bit of a lack of leadership. There's a strong person for infrastructure, but Lavanya just can't be about infrastructure alone. There has to be other visions of mobility and economy and all of that. That's not really quite there, So, and the people are there, but all of these positions come with anywhere public position comes with a lot of public criticism and difficult. So it's difficult to take leadership, as somebody once said. The nail that sticks out gets banged down. Nobody wants to really do that anymore. And it's not that there isn't the capacity, there is, but the environment seems hostile, and you have to have a very tough skin. So it's tough, So that's just my view. That's how I see it. But like I said, there's so many other aspects to Auroville, I'm looking forward to the schools reopening. Sherbender's 150th. So for us in land board, we really want to try and deal with the difficult cases of, the remaining land that remains in the city is not being bought out of design. It's not being bought because all of them have problems, court cases, family disputes, missing documents, etc., etc. So we're really trying to focus for Sherbender's 150th to try and consolidate a little bit more of the land in the city. Like I said, I'm hoping that the secretary will be able to assist us in some of the matters. Also we get very dependent on the foundation to do things. It's not that, it's not like Auroville can just buy. We need the foundation to sign off on things. And it's been a little bit difficult. We've just been squeaking by, but it hasn't been very active right now. I think Srinivas has also been overwhelmed and tired. So it's been hard to, we just scrape along and do the minimum, but it's not been super proactive. And that's what is needed right now.
It'll also depend a lot. There could be some support depending on the governing board, who comes as the chairman of the governing board and who the governing board members are, whether they're also active or not, or they could, if they choose to, help with these land issues as well. So we're waiting with great curiosity to see who will be appointed as the next governing board.
On another note, in Tamil Nadu politically, it's quite interesting. You have the Tamil Nadu government has a very interesting finance minister who's highly educated, is Harvard educated, is in New York, professionally worked in Singapore, and is hailing from Madurai. The government seems to have picked up a lot of academics. You have the Duflo and Sen, who just won the Nobel Prize, who have now been scooped up to look at the Tamil Nadu economy. I didn't realize that Tamil Nadu contributed 13% or so to India's GDP. I didn't realize that it was such a powerhouse. And it's interesting. So let's see this government. Also, this Tamil Nadu government is close. Joss has done a lot of work with this government. So hopefully there'll be a bit more of a positive relationship with the local government, which has never been really bad, but at this stage, I think it's really essential that something happen, and we're all looking forward to, people who know him to meet, but, we knew that they were all occupied with the COVID crisis. So now that maybe will be settling in the next couple of weeks, it'll be time for Auroville to slowly try and meet the local government. I mean, I remain hopeful. I don't know. So far, everything I've read, interviews I've seen, I've been really genuinely enthused. Yeah, that's local politics for you.
I want to thank you both for getting up early and spending your morning with us. And we have so much appreciation and love for you both, and hope you'll pass that. We miss Auroville. I think I speak for many of us here who have Auroville close in our hearts. And just give you both the big hugs, and are glad that you have an empowered, dynamic secretary on the way, and hope that that combination of Shakti force moves us a little bit forward on the path. And we'll be watching very carefully both for the recovery from the COVID and the new governing board. But I think so much needs to come from within Auroville, and the more Auroville can do for itself, the less interference there will be, and more alignment with its true purpose. So we thank you all. For those of you who want to join tomorrow morning, we'll be talking with Manoj about his Swadharma work, and we'll also be ending our 5 days with Gopika. So there's more Auroville as part of this gathering, July 1st through 5th, and we'll be seeing Martha tomorrow. So thank you all for coming together, and lots of
Thank you, everybody.
Good
Thank you.
wishes.
It's really lovely to see you all. It's really
It really has been. Thanks, Julian, for organizing this. And thank you all for your support.